Recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. I'd like to welcome everybody to Friday Night Big Book Study Workshop of the program of recovery laid out by the first 100 men and women. How we open this meetings with the Serenity Prayer. What do we need for a good meeting?
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Right. Like I said, I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. My sobriety date's April 8th, 1989.
Hi, Tony.
We're gonna look at things a little different tonight. For those come here looking for a bit of hope, you won't be disappointed. For those that come here looking for something to argue about, you'll have lots. And those looking for a resentment, I'll accommodate you. So, if I had $1 for every time someone said, when I first met you, you really pissed me off. Of course I did. You weren't well. No, sorry. Oh, man, we hate the truth, don't we? Especially when someone else is presenting it to us. It's kind of like when we go through this, we're going to look at step 3 tonight. And on page 63, they talk about we thought well before taking this step. And most people don't know what that means. We thought well before taking this step. A lot of people think we need to be well before taking this step, and they never take it, right? So there's a lot of misconceptions around page 63 and the design of this thing. So we're going to kind of cover the basis of that, and then we're going to move on to step 3, and then next week we're going to start over again. But in regards to this, if you kind of look at page 62, they give us some ideas here, because a lot of people think we apply these principles to our alcoholism, right? And a lot of people are under the impression, I'll always be suffering from alcoholism, right? They misunderstand. I think this way because I'm an alcoholic. No, you think this way because you're untreated. Like there's a lot of different components to this thing. And if you don't understand it, then you'll always be blaming an illness that you really don't comprehend, because there's the human element to this, and then there's the symptoms that we exhibit, which is called alcoholism, right? If you're still suffering from alcoholism, then you're prone to what? You're going to drink again, right? That's the promise of step 1. And kind of when we went kind of through this, on the highlight of this, they talked about, when we looked at we agnostics, we'll kind of start there and go through it. When they talk about diagnosing yourself, right? So when we kind of go to page 44, they kind of tell us, if you've we got the worksheets if you want to get involved and kind of go through this to get their understanding what the problem is and what the solution is before making a decision where we are tonight. And there's people here Tuesdays and Friday nights at 6 o'clock if you need extra help going through this, guidance going through this, because a lot of us look for the answers we think it is. Anybody struggle with the sheets? You're looking for what you think it should say instead of what it does say. Like it's a big problem, right? Because a lot of us are very educated by coming to meetings and doing nothing. I don't know if you've kind of noticed that, right? We pride ourselves on the great knowledge we have accumulated by sitting in meetings, right? That's kind of, how many people's relapsed here? So what happens is you never experienced this thing that's available. A lot of people are in the fellowship and they experience abstinence, mistaking it for recovery, right? Because once you experience this recovery, then no explanation is necessary, right? And it's kind of like, and if you never experienced it, then you really don't comprehend what this is about. It's kind of like, how many people remember the first time they felt the magic in a drink? Not the first time they had a drink, but the first time they had the magic in a drink, where the promises came true. You comprehended the word serenity and you knew peace and right? And you've seen how your experience can benefit everybody around you. Anybody get that? And you just kind of like the world kind of fell off of you. You know what I mean? And as you took a drink, you triggered a phenomenal craving. And then we just kept on going. I don't know if it took care of any problems, but we just didn't care anymore. Anybody get to that place? And we learned how to live in the moment. We learned how to be present. And then they call last call. Or you're being read your rights, whatever the situation. Or you wake up in places that were perfectly acceptable to go to bed in. I don't know if anybody's had that. I don't know if anybody's had the joy of coming to driving a car down the highway. And you ever see that commercial where they put the glasses of beer in front? One of the last times I drove, you'd have to put 2 more glasses in front there, right? Remember this guy going to me, goes, "Hey, Tony, why don't you let her drive?" I wonder, who's her and who are you? Right? And where am I? Like, I'm driving in Vancouver. I come to driving a car and I can't see nothing. I guess I made them nervous, right? So I was perfectly okay with what was going on. So I guess I pulled over. She started driving, whoever she was, and wherever I picked them up from. And the next thing I know, I come to eating soup in some restaurant. I don't know if anybody has that kind of story. It's just everyday living. So, and that's after, at that time, it was about 10 years of in and out. Right? And so if you're to ask me about alcoholism, I'd have my own understanding of alcoholism. And I wouldn't have their understanding of alcoholism. So I was getting my conduct and the things that I suffered from in my history and my life mixed up with alcoholism. They're 2 different conversations. A lot of people say, I was an alcoholic before I drank. You can't be an alcoholic before you drink. You need to drink alcohol in order to find out you're alcoholic. I don't know if that kind of makes any sense. It's like, I was allergic to peanuts before I ate them. Well, how would you know? You need to eat them to have a reaction. So when our type of people take a drink, what happens to us that doesn't happen in normal, everyday temperate drinkers? Phenomenal craving, can't stop, right? So, but how many people are concerned with stopping when they start? Is that a kind of...
Some is good, more is better.
Yeah, like how many people like the idea of controlling and enjoying your drinking?
No.
If you're controlling it, are you enjoying it? And if you're enjoying it, are you controlling it? So how many people thought they were alcoholic because of the consequences? I'm an alcoholic because of the consequences. What gets your attention to the illness? Because if you didn't have the consequences, would you have come here looking for a solution to a problem you don't understand? So a lot of us come here and think, oh, the unmanageable, I don't pay my bills, I'm losing jobs and all this stuff. That's what makes me alcoholic. No, that makes you unmanageable, and also the human component. There's a lot of people out there who end up in jail sober. I know it's hard to believe. I've ended up in jail sober. My story, sober, is what get people here drinking. So it's like, so there's the human component to this, and there's the disease concept of this. So when on page 44, they talk about here, in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. So they're very clear when they're saying you and who they're talking to. They're talking to the reader and who's making the statement, right? We hope. Who's the we part of that? Yeah, it's the people that put this manual together to show other people what the problem is, what the solution is, and the course of action that they've found and applied to their lives that brought about this solution that they talked about, right? To recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So I need to understand what those 2 components are. So the first symptom in alcoholism that makes us powerless over alcohol and made them powerless over alcohol is what? The allergy. That's what they talk, we were powerless over alcohol. They're talking in past tense because they went through a course of action. They're showing you what they did. If you're new, you'd be saying, I am powerless over alcohol. 2 different statements. And you hear people say, it's a we program. Not if you're not doing it. It's not. It's a you problem, not an us problem. Well, does that kind of make sense? And how many people come to meetings hoping that the change would happen? How many people have relapsed here more than a couple times? So coming to meetings is like going to the airport. It's exciting for a little while, but after 90 days, the thrill kind of loses itself. You know what I mean? People coming, people going, and you're not happy for anybody, and everybody's happy, joyous. You're not even looking out the window anymore. Anybody been like that in meetings? Anybody get to a place where they can't even stand themselves anymore? But they were happy about being here. Life was so fantastic, so, you know, the possibility of change and all that, the illusion of the elusive feeling of camaraderie and people being surrounded, helping us and all that. How many people have that feeling, wow, I think this is really cool being here, after they get over the idea of having to come to AA? Some of us, we think it's like a death sentence, right? You ever seen some new people? I'm in AA, the drama is like the worst thing that ever happened to them, other than their own story. So they talk about, we made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Have they done that? So by now, you should know what type of alcoholic you are. Most people don't know what type of alcoholic they are. Have fun this week and walk around asking people, hey, here you just introduced yourself as an alcoholic. What type of alcoholic are you? You get really weird looks. Or you hear people say, I'd done step 1 before I got here. You've been suffering from step 1 before you got here. But in order to do step 1, you need to comprehend what's being presented. To admit to something means you've kind of looked at the evidence being presented. So here they've talked about the allergy. They've talked about the malady that centers where? In the mind, right? And they describe that. The reason they use the word malady is because it's really hard to define, right? And on page 37, they call this like a phenomena that happens in our thinking. It's an unexplainable event. Anybody ever tried to explain their relapse to somebody here? Anybody ever try to figure out why you're relapsing? Have you had that conversation with you? And did you say, I don't know why you're doing what you're doing? And then anybody say, I'm never going to do it again and do it again? So because you're still stuck on the idea, it may be a behavioral problem. So when you get to this stage, you kind of realize I'm dealing with an illness. I'm dealing with the illness of alcoholism. And it consists of these 2 symptoms. And if I exhibit these 2 symptoms, my only fate is to continue on. An alcoholic death. With some people, that's okay with them, like my brother and my other brother. They both are okay with my other brother's long dead now. He died when he was 32. My other brother's carrying on. They made that decision. No, I don't want to live a spiritual way of life. I'm happy living the way I'm living, which doesn't make any sense to me as an observer into his life. But he's happy doing what he's doing. Somewhere along the line, I had to make that decision. Do I want a spiritual way of life, or do I want to die an alcoholic death? But in order to make that determination, you need to understand what you're talking about. Does that kind of make sense? That's why it says, we thought well before taking this step. What are we thinking about? We're thinking about, on page 63, before we do this step is, we're staying on 40 words, but they're saying is, we thought well of what? What I'm up against. Because if I don't have this what? What do I need in order to recover? Spiritual awakening, psychic change. This means the same thing. One happens more rapidly and one happens on educational variety. But both are obtainable through this course of action. Those who have had a sudden spiritual experience, you won't be able to maintain it if you don't know the recipe to keep you connected to something greater than yourself on how to rearrange. I've had vital spiritual experiences at different times in my 11 years of in and out, but I didn't know how to maintain and develop it. And then what happens is the disease of alcoholism comes back. I can't see, feel, and touch it because it's an unexplainable event. And next thing I know, I'm drinking again. And they give examples of that and more about alcoholism, don't they? The one guy suddenly thought it would be a great idea to put an ounce of whiskey in his milk. But previous to that, he was convinced that he could never safely drink again. He had everything to lose. Remember that? How many people have been there? But there he was, having a sandwich and a glass of milk, and some people say, oh, that was... And they tie his life or what's happening in his life with the reason why he relapsed. Anybody ever do that? Oh, see, he's irritable. He worked for the car dealership. So that's why he drank again. They know you think like that, so they'll say, hey, let's go with the other guy. Didn't have a care in the world. Not a cloud on the horizon. This guy's doing good. If he did a self-check-in, which we like to do nowadays, that's a bad conversation. Self-asking self, what do you think? Glad you asked, right? And so, you think you're okay? I think you're fine. So if he did that check-in, right, at the hotel, as he crossed the threshold of the dining room, what happened? Suddenly, this shift happened that paralleled with the sound thinking that described on page 37, this phenomena, this unexplainable event, made sense to him to have a couple highballers. Then he left the bar and we know who he found. Then he found a cab driver and we know what they did. If you're drinking for 2 or 3 days, you know there's dry goods involved, right? So there's other things involved, right? I don't know if anybody's being AA will stick to that. So they talk about here, if you have this condition, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. So arrived at that point, it's kind of like my fate is I'm going to die an alcoholic death unless I obtain this psychic change or spiritual experience. What does that look like? The other members say, well, this is the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. Anybody ever read that? It's a pretty profound change when you look at the words. We miss a lot of revolutionize. That's a big word. Revolutionize our whole thinking and attitude about life and it rearranges us from the inside out, which was once the guiding forces, guiding thoughts, feelings, emotions, and ideas are cast to one side. It didn't say gone. Cast to one side, right? And we're dominated by new thoughts and ideas and possessed with a new sense of power that this thing talks about. And they talk about here that if you need to obtain this thing, you're going to probably be thinking about your religious ideas or what somebody else's ideas of what religion is. Anybody ever do that? And if you do your own idea about God, you're going to miss what they're talking about. A lot of people here, where the change in the fellowship is shifted and the recovery rate has dropped, is people started going with their own ideas instead of our ideas. Right? They don't understand what we mean by power greater than yourself, or as we understand it. It says, I understand it. Well, how's your understanding working for you so far? Welcome back. Right? You need to understand what we're talking about. And then from there, they say you can choose your own conception of what makes sense to you. Right? But you need to understand the basis of it that we all understand. So the first 100 men and women, they said they all agreed on what? The problem. Yes or no? And they all agreed on the solution. And they all agreed on the course of action. So I need to understand what they're talking about if I want what they have. That way, when I start going, anybody ever been in a mall or by one of those travel agencies and you see the pictures on the window and all that stuff? And at some point in your life, you say, man, it'd be nice to have a holiday from my life and not take me with me. Anybody ever look at those pictures and say, wow, it'd be nice to fantasize about the idea of being on this beach and all that other stuff? It's the idea that this is possible, right? And so you see the pictures, you go in and talk to the travel agent and says, yeah, we could get you there. This is how much it would cost. This is the flight. This is our itinerary. Here's what you need to do in order to get there. And then when you get there, you should be able to correlate the picture that you've seen on the wall with the location where you're at. Then you'll know you're in the right spot. Does that kind of make sense? And that's like this. We're going to show you what it looks like when you get there. We're going to show you what it looks like when you're not going there, right? Because this book is really cool. It talks about what your life looks like if you're not on course, and what your life looks like if you are on course, and how to get you on course. They used to talk about on the beam, off the beam. They don't say that anymore, right? But it talks about, in the second half of how it works, the principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress. That means I'm governed by new thoughts and ideas. Doesn't mean my old thoughts and ideas are gone, but I have an alternative way of looking at things. I have two kind of ways of looking at things. Most of us just have one way of looking at things. That's why in step 11 it says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. So there's my ideas, and then in meditation there's another idea formulating and the ability to move toward the life that I'm hoping to achieve. Does that kind of make sense? Without that, who's governing, who's eating your lunch for you? You think you are, but it's actually your past is still making all the decisions for you. So here they're saying at the bottom of 44 and the top of 45, they're saying if a mere code, if you were able to change you by being nice, a lot of us would have changed ourselves a long time ago. Anybody ever try nice sobriety here? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Come on, I'm working on myself. I'm doing nice things. I joined the church. I'm in the choir. Wearing a tie, cutting my hair. Look how much I've changed. Huh? The spots are still under the suit, right? Leopard doesn't never change the spots. And then something happens to take us out of the lifestyle that we're trying to build. How many people have tried to rebuild their lives here and made a good start? And then something takes you out. You notice that? And what that is alcoholism. So what you've experienced is abstinence. You're able to recreate your life, right? Because if you don't drink and use, does your life not start getting better? You get a job, things start happening, you start looking at what you're accumulating. Look, the promises are coming true. Look at my watch, look at my girlfriend, look at my house, look at everything I got. The promises are coming true, and then you're at meetings talking about how great your life is as a result of the things you've accumulated. Anybody? And then you go celebrate and start punning off all those things that you've accumulated. Wondering how you got there again. Because of this disease of alcoholism hasn't been removed. It's still present, but you can't see, feel, and touch it because you're deluded to the fact that you think you could feel you could feel, see, and touch it. It's something that you can't see, feel, and touch, right? Because if you can do it, then it'll be a behavioral problem. Does that kind of make sense? So that explains why we've never been able to recreate our lives, because lack of power is our dilemma. Why is lack of power our dilemma? Because we can't create the internal change sufficient enough for continual guidance and development in our lives. We get to a certain point where we take ourselves out because we're crippled by past ideas, past emotions, past feelings. You know, anybody ever notice the more sober you get, the more crazy you get? But you're able to keep the chameleon? Hi, I'm sober. I'm turning it over, letting it go. You're at home weaving a rope, right? Never been happier. Kick the cats through the screen. Right? You know, like we have explosions all over. You ever notice that? You're doing good, and then you just lose your shit. Anybody have those moments? And then, okay, now I'm going to get my life together. Because what you're doing is you're not dealing with the energy that's inside you. What you're doing is burying it, and then it gets to a place where you can't contain it anymore. And then you have an even bigger blowout than you did the last time. And then you make a resolution. So lack of power to create the change and the shift at an internal level sufficient enough where I'm no longer governed by the things in my past. So as they go through this, all the way through, we agnostics, they talk about looking at things in a new way. And the basis of it is this power that's accessible to us, that if we tap into this thing that creates the change, if we harvest this thing that's in every man, woman, and child, we could create a continuous change in our life for longevity. Remember in Bill's story? Before he had the recipe, how long was he able to get sober for? Sometimes a couple months. The goose hung high, could laugh at the gin mills. He was recreating his life based on desire, will, and abstinence. And then he relapsed again. And then when he ended up in treatment the second time, he even had an even bigger resolve of changing his life. What he wouldn't do to change his life, to fix things. Anybody been at that place? Then he left treatment for a while. What kept him sober was fear. Then came the insidious insanity. So he was never able to recreate his life sufficient enough to create change for him and everybody around him. Does that kind of make sense? So where the change really happened is when Ebby showed up in his life, brought him a course of action that he showed Bill how to incorporate in his life. He got tapped into a power greater than himself, and he started incorporating this change in life as life went on. So he was plagued with depression for a year and a half. Right, that nearly drove him back to drink. But he was able to incorporate this solution that saved him from those low spots. It's pretty wild, eh? So the difference is he incorporated these principles that connected him to this power that created a continuous change in his life. And that's the recipe we have now. So if you look at page 54, they talk about where we actually directed from is our subconscious. And we can't see, feel, and touch that. So what it looks like is by the time I get the memo, meaning my subconscious is putting together these, is kind of calculating what's going on, kind of instinct-based. I'm kind of always aware, and my brain's always working, and I'm always on guard and on high state of intensity. Anybody? My wife came to a couple of meetings. She says, "You guys are intense. Like you have this frequency of intensity, like you're ready to go off at any minute," and everybody's smiling. I said, "Yeah, welcome to the nuclear fallout zone." She goes, "I walk in there, I get nervous around you people." I said, "Me too." No, I said, but we do. Like when we look at, like we're intense people, aren't we? We get around normal people, they get worried, right? So anyways, elevators are always fun, eh? Anyway, you ever have those thinking and you kind of go, just don't say nothing, don't look. You're talking to yourself to try to act normal. Normal people don't do that. Just be normal. Just be normal. Try to go undetected. Okay. Don't say nothing. Whoops. Okay. So on page 54, if you back up page 53, this is one of the things that are used out of context all the time. They said God either is or isn't. And a lot of people think that's the question they're asking. Well, you need to make a decision. God either is or isn't. Keep reading. It says, arrived at this point, it might go, whoa. They say, keep reading. Let's explain what we mean by this. And so as they go through, they're saying we are governed by energy. We are governed by power. right? We're governed by these emotions and feelings and thoughts and ideas, and everything that were made up from our past is determining how we conduct ourselves today, how our thinking, does that kind of make sense? Where I was raised governs how I used to think, feel, and respond to life. If I was raised in a different area, I would respond and think differently. I'd still have alcoholism, but my experience with life would be different. Does that kind of make sense? So, what they're talking about here, they talk about this energy that's inside of us, and they're trying to talk about, we're not these things. The tissue out of which our lives were constructed. Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? So how many people spent time thinking alone, and all those emotions and feelings? Like in the meeting today, how many people had different thoughts and ideas start coming up, and then you left the meeting for a little while? You started going into thoughts and ideas. So your subconscious is ruling you still, and you don't know it's doing it because lack of awareness and power, and that thing that they talked about, the unmanageability, is still present enough that you can't acknowledge it to step back from it to stay present. And that's part of the condition sometimes, right? So these things are governing my life. So where do I need to get straightened out at the level sufficient enough to recreate my life? Deep down within, because my consciousness is determining my thinking. My thinking is determining my feelings. If my consciousness and my experience with life isn't correct, right, and I'm still harboring resentment, fears, and harms, and impending calamity and doom, how am I going to be thinking? I'm going to be in a high state of intensity, right? Am I not? Debate and conflict with inside of myself. And then I start involving other people, because I'm interpreting what's going on or in response. And like, we're kind of really weird. We could create a story and involve other people. Anybody ever create a story, involve other people, and then you realize it was a story, and then you apologize for involving them? Anybody ever have an argument with somebody who's not there waiting for them to come home? And you finish the argument like they've been there the whole time. They're going, whoa, 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 what's going on here? You know what's going on here. No, I don't. So that's the subconscious they're talking about. So on the next page, they're saying that this entity, this power, as we understand it, our understanding is this a life force within inside of us. We all have it. It's not for me, it's not for you, it's for us. Right? And they talk about, actually we're fooling ourselves, page 55. Actually we're fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by worship of other things, but in some form or another it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and a miraculous demonstration of that power in human lives are fact as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we had for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but it was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us, and in the last analysis is only there he may be found. It was so with us. So they're saying there's only one place we can find this power that recreates our lives, and it's with all of us. It's not outside of us. It's not in a rock. It's not in a tree. It's not in a doorknob. It's not outside of ourselves, it's inside of ourselves, because you need to get access to it. If you don't get access to it, when life happens, your brain's not going to look. Anybody, when you get jammed in, your brain goes, okay, now's a good time to stop and pray? When you get instinct-based, you ever notice your emotions and you're more driven and more revved up, and your thinking becomes less and you become more fight or flight? Anybody? And there could be nothing happening. We create this revving up within ourselves. Anybody have that level of intensity happening? So here they're saying we could reconstruct that. So as we go through here, we go through how it works. And then when we get to page 62, 63, they stop talking about alcoholism and they start talking about the human condition. See, we think we hold the market on resentments and the human component. Right? How many 12-step fellowships are there out there? Hundreds. They suffer from the human condition. Right? What we need to do is we apply these principles to our human condition, not our alcoholism. right? The purpose of going through this course of action, step 2 says, what's available to me is this psychic change or spiritual experience if I'm willing to go through this course of action, right? And when I go through the course of action, what's the purpose of the course of action? Is to tap me into this power. That's the main purpose of this book. Where and how am I to find this power that's going to change my life? Well, that's what this book is about. So if I do what they did, what is the likelihood I'll get what they got? How many people are here right now? 4 of you. Good. There's 100 people here for you. That's good. How many people are thinking? There you go. Okay. Just when you find yourself thinking, just take a big breath and come back to the moment. Just come back here, right? So they talk about, on page 62, selfish, self-centered, that we think is the root of our trouble. We don't think that. That's what they're saying. I've never come up with that idea. How many people sat there and said, oh my God, I think I'm the cause of all my problems? We have a list of other people who are more to blame for our stuff than we are. Anybody got a list of people, places, and things they blame for their condition? I was so stuck to my story that I could never possibly change or look for change because I'm this way, because look at my life. Here, let me show you my life. This is why I am. So I'd make excuses for how I am. My sponsor says, no, you are the way you are because you haven't done a course of action to change. You can't help but continue to do what you've been doing. My story was what I used to be like, what I continue to be like, and what I was still like. Because I never really experienced recovery. I experienced abstinence. I never experienced this thing that's available here that these people talked about that went before us. This internal shift in the spiritual appendix. They talked about all our members, with few exceptions, have tapped into an inner resource of strength. That means they're able to create a shift within inside of themselves that changes their perception of their reality. They're not stuck with an instinct-based. They could turn through these principles and go through a spiritual-based living instead of an instinctual-based living. But I need to know what that looks like. So page 62 starts talking about that. They talk about selfish, self-centered. That we think is the root of our trouble. Driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion. So what 2 thoughts you want to go with? If you're driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion, what 2 thoughts would you like to depend on? How many people want to trust their own thinking? That's why it says being convinced. We're at step 3, meaning can I afford to keep thinking the way I'm thinking, feeling the way I'm feeling, and getting what I've always been getting? Can I afford to continue doing my old ideas here? Can I afford to keep going, governed on my own thinking, feelings, and actions, coming up with my own game plan? It's not my program. It's not for me. It's not my God. It's not like it's gotten pretty. I work with lots of people, and what happens is a lot of people are saying mine now, mine. No, it's not yours. If you want what we got, then it's ours. This is our program of recovery. This is our access to the market. What's yours is your experience with this thing, and you'll find it's the same experience as we have. It's collective. That's why in the spiritual appendix, all our members, with few exceptions, have tapped into this inner resource of strength. If you want what we have. It's collective. It means it's available for everybody. If you suffer from alcoholism, this is the human condition on page 62. Everybody has it. Everybody. Alcoholics, non-alcoholics. Anybody have teenager kids? Holy smokes. I think my kids are alcoholic. No, they're human. They're driven by their hormones. A lot of us, 40, 50 are starting to hit puberty now. So I'm sorry. You'll get that later, right? So, they go, right, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation. But we invariably find that some time in the past we have made decisions based on who? Self. Based on everything that has, like all my past experience from this moment past determines how I think, feel, and respond to life. All that stuff at a subconscious level. By the time I get the memo, it's already set in motion. My thoughts, ideas are already set in motion. I've already come to the idea that I formulated that I'm taking action on. Right? So in order to change my thinking level, I need to change at a subconscious level. And I can't do that on my own. So they talk about here. So time made decisions based on self would later place us in a position. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. This confirms page 54, right? And the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. So we're an extreme example of the human condition. We're like, you know what, like Savvy says, our emotions, our response to life is on steroids. Anybody ever look at you and ask you what you're doing? Like sober? What the hell are you doing? What are you thinking? I can't believe you just did that. What the hell? I can't believe I just did that. Anybody have those conversations? Why am I doing this? Why there's always not self-loathing? Anybody experience that? How about resentment? When you got a resentment, how many people let it go? I'll let it go when I'm down good and ready to let it go. But first, some people are going to pay. We're the most spiritual people when nothing's happening. You ever notice that? Oh, something happening in your life, let it go, turn it over. Acceptance is the answer to all your problems. Something that happened in my life, hold it a minute. Things have just gotten serious. You ever notice when it's your problem, it's serious? If it's somebody else's problem, just deal with it. Let it go. Turn it over. It's like this guy came in one day. Says, the house is on fire. Just turn it over. No, your house is on fire. What? And that's like we are with our problems, right? So they arise out of self, and they say there's no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. So they give us this idea that I need to be able to shift my focus and my energy. But I need to know what that looks like. If I don't know what it looks like or how it's cultivated or where it comes from or the basis of it, then I'll always be directed from it. Because what I do is I don't get rid of energy. I bury it. Right? And this stuff starts conducting my life. A lot of us are riddled with, I call these toxic containments within inside of ourselves. So when I used to think about my story, I'd be bottled up with emotion and ideas. Like I'd rethink and re-feel it, and I'd be crippled by my story. I'd be reliving it because this containment section within inside is still holding all that energy. And I didn't know how to deal with it, so I'd bury it back down and I'd create a diversion or get loaded. Like all the other times I tried to do a 4-step without spiritual direction, I tried to do it based on self. And I didn't have the elements of dealing with me on a level necessary to face me along spiritual lines. So what happens is when all these containments, kind of worms would open up, I would end up being taken out by my own emotional deformities. That kind of like the pain got so big I needed an escape. I don't know if anybody's been there. The inability to bury it, get rid of it, and I'd be crippled driven by it, and then the relapse would happen. So as I went through the 4th on a spiritual plane, and I started applying these spiritual principles, I was able to get freedom from all that stuff. And what it did is decompress all that energy that was locked up and contained. Right? And I was able to deal with it along a spiritual direction. So there's 2 ways of going through the steps. There's you going through the steps, and then there's a spiritual process going through the steps. And if you go through a spiritual process, you get relief from this thing. That's why the promises talk about you'll suddenly realize that God is doing for you what you couldn't do for yourself. Most people are saying, look what I'm doing for myself. I'm working on myself, I'm doing this and that's not our approach. Our approach isn't working on yourself and dealing with yourself and taking care of yourself. That's not our solution. Our solution is focusing on something greater than ourselves. That's what we thought well before taking the step. Making sure we're ready. Making sure we could abandon. Not surrender, not let go, abandon. So when they say abandon ship, what does that mean? Meaning you need to find another vessel to take you to safety. And that's what the spiritual principle is. I'm abandoning my direction for a new one. That's what the second half of How It Works talks about. So they talk about here, neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. So self-centeredness means the constant thought of ideas and past events and future events, and just the constant chatter and anxiety of my existence. Anybody know that? Anybody ever been to a meeting and you come to about halftime? You show up and then you're just thinking, when the moments of quiet, you see what you're still carrying. Right? You sit there and it takes like some of us, the whole meeting before we get present. Sometimes it's right away. Sometimes if you go, hey, who read How It Works? You go, I don't know. Because it's just, your subconscious is just being overflowed. That's why in the beginning it talks about going to a lot of meetings, at least to get some relief for yourself. So they talk about here, neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help or source or creation and whatever you want. By the time you get here, you've made peace with that idea. You know what they mean. We had to have access to this power to recreate our lives. Next, we decided hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. That's pretty cool when you kind of look at that aspect. He was the principal, we're his agents. He is the father, we're his children. Most good ideas are simple, which is the problem for us. And this concept was the keystone of the new triumphant arch to which we passed to freedom. So when you talk, when a lot of people miss that is a shift within inside of yourself where you find freedom from whatever your life circumstances is. And the exercise and we agnostics that we do is that you've always had this life force. If you look back over your life, how many people have felt total despair here? Darkness and impending doom. And then somebody gives you some hope and it shifts all your insides. It's like you're in a different room inside the same vessel. Like there's two realities inside of you. There's a shift that happens where before you didn't have the power or the hope or the energy to move forward. All of a sudden you have the idea that maybe it's okay. You ever walk into a room and people are fighting? You ever feel the energy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? You ever walk in a room and there's a lot of good stuff going in there? You ever walk into a meeting and it's totally solution oriented? You get like electrified? You ever walk into a meeting and it's all new people running it? I mean, sorry. Did I say that out loud? It becomes problem oriented. You ever been to discussion meetings where the topics are all problem oriented? Because that's where our mind is. Problem. How can I fix these problems? Where the meeting is designed to, if I have a problem, I bring it to a discussion meeting, and how do I apply these spiritual principles to get relief from it? But if you haven't done this course of action, you won't get relief from it. What you'll do is create a diversion and bury for a bigger explosion later. So here they're saying about this experience. So, which we pass to freedom. So they're saying this thing's within inside of me. But I don't know how to get access to it. But I have experienced it. In my darkest times, this one time, I don't know where I came to at home, and this voice said, turn over. Don't fall asleep on your back. I don't know where I was, what happened or anything. But I became conscious enough that I didn't fall asleep on my back. I turned over. In case I vomited in my sleep, I would have died of asphyxiation. A lot of alcoholics die that way. I know, right? Where did that voice come from? So how many people has had that? So imagine if you were to tap into that on a 24/7, 365 basis, where you're able to tap into this thing, what they talk in 11, and you're able to harness it and develop it. What would your life start looking like? You'll be amazed before you're halfway through, not somewhat thrilled. You hear people talking about the promises, the promises are coming true. Maybe you should inform your face. Sorry. Did I say that out loud? Okay. Sometimes they get away on me. Okay. So here's the important part. A lot of people miss this. So when we sincerely took such a position that I'm going to have a new director, right? An agent, a new guide, or a new system, or a new direction through my life, right? Step 3, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. That means I need to do the course of action. The change happens by the time I get to step 10. I may start experiencing shifting in perception and energy and all that other, but the real freedom comes in 10 when the problem's removed. What problem's removed by the time we get to step 10? Alcoholism. After I've had a spiritual experience, I'm no longer dealing with alcoholism. I'm dealing with the human component of this thing that I apply these principles to. because I can't deal with alcoholism, nor can I apply these principles to alcoholism. Right? Because if I'm still suffering from alcoholism, I'm going to drink. So that component has to be removed so I can have freedom enough to start dealing with life on life's terms. Does that kind of make sense? So the miracle of this thing is the removal of alcoholism, where I could get to recover sufficient enough that I could start dealing with life on life's terms without the insanity of the first drink returning. Right? And then I get a daily reprieve from what? From alcoholism. And all my problems, if I'm willing to practice these spiritual principles. I get to match calamity with serenity. It didn't mean I'm free from life. That means the promises are still coming true, whether the people come back, whether I don't get a job, whether nothing happens, whether I still have the ability to have a new sense of freedom and happiness regardless of my external conditions. That's a big difference, right? So they talk about here, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. If you kind of look, this is a contract that I carry still today between me and God, me and Source, me and power, me and creation, whatever you want to call it, right? We had a new employer, being all powerful. He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. What's his work? Maintaining and developing these principles. We'll find out what it is to be of service to God and the people around us, to be of service to Source, to help other people. Then that's what saved Bill from himself, by practicing these principles in all his affairs. He was still suffering from self, but he got relief from self by incorporating these principles sufficient enough to carry this message. He found out what saved the day was continuous work with other people. And it saved him from himself by carrying this message, not his message. This message. Ebby carried this message to Bill. Bill, as he lied in the hospital, thought other people might benefit from this thing. He had a revolutionary change in attitude and outlook. Right? Even the doctor said, whatever you got going on, you better hang on to it. The people around him started to experience the promises. Right? As he lied in the hospital. And here we are 2019 with the same kind of component. Once you experience this, no explanation is necessary. It's kind of like the magic of a drink. After that, you knew intuitively if you wanted to feel better, have a drink. Then it started to work boomerang and started ruining our life instead of developing it, right? But if you were sitting in a bar and somebody walked up and you asked for a Ryan Coke and he brought you just a Coke, would you know the difference?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We have a believer. Oh, yeah. Eh? Right away, if the nostrils aren't flaring a bit, you're like, you know what I mean? Like, I want a new bartender, right? So we look for the effect. We know what we're expecting. But if you've never experienced that, then you would enjoy a Coke thinking that you were having the experience. And that's the way a lot of us go through sobriety. We haven't experienced it, so you don't know when you're not in it anymore. Does that kind of make sense? Because once you experience it, then you know when you're not in it. And you need to get back on track and get back right spiritually. That's what this is all about, right? The review at night, in the morning, all through the day. You know what an instinct-based life looks like, and you know what a spiritual life looks like, because you've experienced it. Once you've experienced it, no explanation is necessary after that. But if you haven't experienced it, then it's not long before you'll take yourself out, because you'll be crippled by your own life and your own conditions. You won't have the ability to live life on life's terms. So they talk about here, established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves. So the symptom of somebody who has had a spiritual experience or psychic change is the overwhelming urge to want to help other people. They're on the phones, they're in their home groups, they're showing up at business meetings, they're looking for the newcomer. They are involved. You can't stop them from being involved. If you haven't had that experience, you're still stuck on self. You're looking for what you can get out of this instead of what you can bring to it. You haven't, but it's one of those symptoms that when you have it, you just catch fire from the inside out. I don't know how else to explain that. Our little plans and design, more and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in. We're having a new experience with this thing as flow in. As we enjoyed peace of mind. So what came first, peace of mind or the access to the power? Access to the power. What's this book is about? Its main object is to enable you to find this source, this power, which will create the change. Right? So if I do the recipe, what is the likelihood I'll get this thing that they're talking about? 100%. That's why they talk about in step 10 before they go on 11. If you've carefully followed directions, you'll experience this thing. Right? And it's not for you, it's for us. It's ours. It's on loan, one day at a time. You get to access it. When you stand, imagine if you went down to the ocean, you're standing there, and somebody walked up and said, "Oh, you like my ocean?" Would you think they're a little nuts? Oh, this is my sunlight. This is my ocean. A little self-centered still, right? This is our ocean. This is our sunlight. I get to enjoy it. I get to participate in the magnificence and the beauty of it. It's not mine. It's like this creation, this life force. We tap into the fellowship of the Spirit. It's a second source that I get access to. We get to utilize or enjoy the power that's connected here, that's connected to a main grid. The whole street gets to enjoy it. Right? It's not mine. It's my light bulb. Okay. Maybe you should plug it in somewhere. I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry. As we felt new power flow in, right? As we discovered we could face life successfully. So that means you'll intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle you. You'll be in these situations. There'll be a shift from inside out. There'll be something different about your response. A part of you will want to still respond, but the other part will go, "Hey, wait a minute. There's something different here. I don't know what it is, but my response to life is different." The people around us will become more aware of the change before we are. We are always the last ones to know. If you're walking around telling everybody how much you've changed, you haven't changed. We do that. Anybody phone relatives? "Hey, I've really changed. Can you give me another chance and lend me 20 more bucks?" Okay, so they talk about, as we discover we could face life success, as we became conscious of his presence. Where's this presence thing? Within. In every man, woman, and child, the fundamental idea of God is there. I get access. What it means to me is personal now, but it's the same. If I held up my cell phone, everybody, cell phone, and I made the indication of a plug-in, would everybody know what I'm talking about? I'm looking to plug in my phone. No matter where I went in the world that had access to cell phones, if I held up the cord and I was going like making the motion of plugging it in somewhere, they would point to an outlet or give me a charger. That says we understand it. How I use my phone is entirely up to me, but it's the same for all of us. We have the same understanding and the same basic fundamental idea how it functions. And then we get, I got a Samsung, I got an iPhone, who cares? We don't care how you understand God. Doesn't ask us to tell it how you tell us, do you have our understanding? Do you have access? Because when you carry this message, you're carrying our idea of getting access to power. You're not carrying your idea. It's like if I started carrying my belief in where I am in my development, I wouldn't be very successful working with people. 30 years later, I've developed my own understanding of this source or this power and my own rituals and my own development and all that. But when I work with new people, I give them the same opportunity that was given to me. I give them this course of action and the information contained in this so they can have their own experience, right? Like if I started getting up here and talking about my belief in Jesus Christ and the Holy Ghost and all that other, like this meeting would go south really fast. Well, that's as I understand him. No, it's not as I understand him, as we understand him. It's generically available for everybody so you can have your own experience. There's no conflict here in this thing, but you need to understand what they're talking about. So they talk about we can face life as we became conscious of his presence. We begin to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We're reborn. What is that a result of that experience that these people are talking about? What's that a result of? The course of action. They're saying this is what we've experienced going through this course of action. Now, if you want what we have and you want this experience that we're talking about, we are now at step 3. We're going to show you how to achieve what we have. If you want what we have, you need to understand what it is. It's like when you look at a roadmap, you need to understand what the people who are directing you to this location, where the location is. Does it not make sense? So no matter where you're from or where you're at, if you need to get to a certain location, you just need to learn how to read the map. If you could read the map, you can get to that location. Does that kind of make sense? Anybody ever use a GPS here? You punch in the coordinates. That's what we're doing here. I'm punching in the coordinates where I want to go. I want this psychic change or spiritual. I want this experience. Am I having it? No. What's the second thing once I punch in the coordinates in the GPS? What's the second thing it does? Huh?
Tells you where to go.
It locates where you are. You need to know where you are. You need to be present. You need to be this source. Where's this source? Deep down within. So that means when I get off track, I need to come back to source, consciousness, power, whatever you want to call it. I need the ability to move from my thinking, move from an instinct, fear-based life to come back to the like the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity. So that means I need to be able to separate from my thinking. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. The ability to assess what's happening. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Courage to change the things I can. The power to carry out the necessary things to create change in my life or the lives of people around me. And the wisdom to know the difference. That's the hard part about the prayer, is the wisdom to know the difference. Because I've had a lot of God moments, and I ended up making amends for them. Hey, you like those relationships? And I think God sent you to me too. and as soon as we get out of detox, does say find a power greater than yourself. Hello, Tony, reel it in. Okay. I have the squirrel. Okay, so then it says we are now at step 3. Many of us, not all of us, many of us, said to our Maker as we understood him. Our Maker as we understood. So I have the same understanding they have, and I understand why I need to do this course of action to achieve this thing that they have. I have the same understanding they have, and I have the same direction and purpose for doing this as they did. Exactly the same. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. We thought well before taking the step, making sure we're ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person such as our wives, best friends, or in this group, or spiritual advisors. But it's better to meet God alone than with someone who might misunderstand him. The wording was, of course, quite optional, so long as we express the idea. This is an idea. A lot of people think it's an achievement. I could achieve these and experience these in step 3. Then you wouldn't need to do the rest of the steps. If you were capable of turning your will and life over the care of God. It doesn't say turn your will and life over to God. It says to the care of. That means if you ask somebody to look after something for you, do you expect it back? Absolutely. No, you gave it to me. But it's my dog. So what? I was just going on holidays. Well, got a new home now. So we see that I'm trusting this process. So what's God's will for me is to do the process that creates this change, to get access to this power. This is an idea. It's a summary of the whole course of action. The 3rd step prayer is a summary, the confirmation of the experiences in step 11. I've formulated this relationship that I'm hoping to achieve now. It's an idea. When I met my wife, she wasn't my wife when I met her, we started dating, which is steps 1, 2, and 3. We got to know each other. Anything could change at any time. You ever notice that? Anybody been in relationships that, this is great. Then you get the call, this is not working. That's alcoholism. See ya, relapse. Steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 is the engagement. More serious. 9, 10, 11, and 12 is the marriage. It becomes a way of life. Right? And so this is what they're saying here. So we got taught that step 3 is this big, huge... No, they say it's an idea. In order to achieve this, I need to go through the course of action. We thought well, meaning, why do I need to take this? Can I abandon myself and go to any lengths? what they mean by any lengths is face the things within inside of myself that have been crippling me, the ghosts, the pains, the things of Christmas past. I think that guy was an alcoholic who made that movie. You're going to be visited by 3. Us, we have a bus. You're going to be visited by 15. Right? Like the whole, and it's kind of like that. He was visited by his past. He made peace with it, and then he had a revolutionary experience. Remember that movie? Everybody around him thought he lost his cheese and his cracker were totally off the same plate. Like he thought he lost it. But he had an experience that he couldn't contain. And that's what they're talking about. Everybody who's experienced this, it's something that's really remarkable. It's really like, wow, like 30 years later. It's the experience of this thing. It's really remarkable, and it's available through a course of action. So after the meeting, after we do the serenity prayer, for those who want to do the third step prayer, ready, move on, we do it in a group after the meeting. If you're not ready for that, just run that way, like your ass is on fire, then run back when it's out. No. We do the third step afterwards. And then this group goes back to the beginning again next week. And then those who do the third step go into the Tuesday night group where we go from 4 to 12 and go through the mechanics on how to develop your own experience with this thing. Because my experience won't be enough. You need to have your own experience with this power that creates this change. Once you experience it, no further explanation will be necessary. But it's for you to make that decision. We'll close with the Serenity Prayer.
Thanks, Tony.
So what seems to be the key ingredient to long-term sobriety?
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
For those that want to do the third step prayer with us, come up here and we'll do the third step prayer. For those that are not ready to make that decision, just give us a bit of room.